because it plays into some of the other things we've talked about this week. Jay in Kentucky, you're on with Jamie and Eric. How are you doing?
Doing well.
Hello. You ready to talk heathen to us?
Well, I know the show's about to end pretty soon, right? So how much time are we talking?
Well,
what we're going to do
is
infinite
patience. So.
Yeah, we're going to talk to you until as long as we can.
Until they call the police to drag us out of here.
And we're going to talk to all the other people on the line. If we have to move into Patreon content after the show, we will. But we want to have these conversations as much as possible.
And also, what I will say is, if we can only have the first part of the conversation now, and we want to continue it, that means next week.
We have a launching off point.
Yeah, we have a launching off point. Yeah. So what did you want to talk about today?
Well, actually, I wanted to mention briefly before I ask Mike, or talk about what I wanted to talk about. Our Norwegian friend that called earlier, his Christmas greeting that we translate Merry Christmas, it's actually Good Yule, as in Yuletide.
Okay.
And that's where that comes from. So
nice.
Yeah. Just incidentally, I thought that was interesting.
That's cool.
So
that's just like when Gesundheit, and different things. Instead of saying bless you, they don't mean bless you. They mean good health.
Yeah.
So. And I believe Yule was originally like the winter solstice festival.
Yep.
In Northern Europe. So
one of those pagan co-ops.
Yeah. Yes. Exactly.
So is that what you wanted to touch on? Because the note here is
I just thought that was interesting when I heard what he said. I don't know Norwegian, but I could hear the roots of the words. So anyway, I wanted to talk about how scientific discoveries have kind of altered religious thinking over time, going all the way back to ancient times.
Can you give us an example real quick?
Sure. So, like, if you go back to ancient Samaria and ancient Egypt and ancient China, where polytheism is common, when people are studying the stars, astrodynamics, how things move in the heavens, there's this, really this sense of it's other, it's chaotic, it's we see that it moves, we don't really know how, and the North Star stays put and the Southern Cross stays put, and they're useful for navigation, but we really don't get it. It's alien and strange, just like the gods are alien and strange and do chaotic things, and it's confusing.
Okay.
And, because life is chaotic and confusing, and that's just the way it is. And then, you get Aristotle, and he says, wait a minute, guys, I see a lot of order going on. And he posits, like the celestial spheres, these circles that represent
the layers,
the motion of the planets, the motion of the stars, the motion of the moon, as spherical, and it's this like perfect, divine, supernatural thing.
Yeah.
But it moves from this chaotic explanation of things to a orderly one. It all stems from a prime mover.
I'm interested. I'm interested in how you're going to tie this back, because we're getting a history lesson. I just kind of want to know how you tie it.
Right.
Which is interesting. But how has the scientific discovery influenced the religious thought? Using that as an example.
Okay, so you can see kind of a connection between the ancient view and polytheism, and then an Aristotelian view connects with something like creationism. Kind of a young Earth. There's one source of all of creation, but it's all supernatural. There's these acts that order things.
Yeah,
in a very supernaturalistic way.
The taxonomy of animals being related to. Like Thomas Aquinas' levels of close to God.
Right, exactly. Okay. It's an ordering, but it's a supernatural ordering.
Right.
And, and that's a shift from the polytheism that you see elsewhere, to a more kind of monotheistic view.
Yeah, in certain parts of the world.
Not necessarily Christian, but monotheistic, that there's a single prime mover. that's ordering things in an organized way.
Monotheism.
Okay,
and
so
then then with like Copernicus, it's like, wait a minute, the data is not fitting
hey Jay,
a Earth-centric view.
Okay.
Jay,
And so
let's cut to the chase. So what?
Okay. Well, I think,
I say that lovingly. We just don't have a lot of time, and I want to try to dive into the meat while we can.
I understand. That's partly why I asked about time.
No worries. I mean,
we can do the highlights this week, and then we can return.
I think
for the more detailed.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that
juicy, fatty
we can agree that the more we know about the world around us, and the more that we explore it, the more that it influences us, and that's in every way, not just religion, but definitely religion.
So for example, the existence of a firmament and rain being gates opening in it is not something that's preached by any church in the Catholic Church. It was at one point. And then the way that rain works was discovered, and the Catholic Church has once again accepted that evolution is an explanation for...
So we agree with you with these things.
Do you have a point beyond that story?
Yes. So let me just do two more very quick examples because I think they illustrate what I'm getting at.
All right.
Let's try and nutshell them. Yeah.
So what I was going to say is, can you give us like a headline of what the conclusion is before we get to those examples?
Actually, that would be good.
Well, I think that faith and rationality are compatible.
Okay. What is your definition of faith?
Belief in God.
Okay.
And,
so let's
basic theism.
Belief in God could be rational.
Right.
Is your
let me give you
narrow it down to
let me give you my definition. Right. Faith is belief without evidence.
Yeah.
Can we try using that definition?
No.
Why?
I don't agree with that.
Why?
Because I think people have experiences that, at least from their own point of view, are evidence. And to say that it's without evidence is like saying, let's run with that.
Let's add the word reliable.
Faith
to
without
that
evidence.
Yeah.
You can have bad evidence.
That's what I mean.
Yeah.
Newtonian physics would say, here's how the planets move, and by the way, gravity also affects stuff on Earth, and it's the same laws, right? That's a naturalistic explanation.
Sure.
So then what about general relativity?
What about it?
That's also a naturalistic explanation.
It is a naturalistic explanation.
Yeah.
So it is rational. There is evidence for it.
Empirical.
And so it does not need faith.
I will say empirical as well.
There's no faith in there yet. So where does faith come in?
We should try not to jump on him as much, but we're eager to get to this, and we've heard things like
how do we know that general relativity is true?
We test it.
Yes, but how do we, I can't go and test it with the resources and time that I have.
Okay, then
so there's a book I can recommend that explains the methods that were used to determine it, and why those methods are considered reliable. Actually, A Brief History of Time by Stephen Hawking does a really good job of that.
I've read that.
Ah, okay, cool. But I mean, if you're saying you can't look at the data yourself, then yes, that's true.
Yeah, that's why.
I can.
That's why it's totally. That's why it's totally okay to assign a provisional confidence level. Thank you, Jamie. You fucking got it exactly.
Sure, absolutely.
Right. So I'll say, you know what? I'll accept this based on this, but I'm absolutely open to being wrong and correcting that if needed.
Absolutely. But even if I accept that data, I'm accepting somebody else's information, that they took measurements.
Okay.
Their material was published and disseminated.
Right.
So I can't prove it for myself.
Right. So
I have to take somebody else's evidence, as a trust exercise.
No.
Yes.
I have to say,
so Jay,
I agree with what this says. I agree with the methodology, but I didn't actually see it. I wasn't actually there.
You do have to say that, given you didn't actually see it, you weren't actually there. So two things. One, if you were there and you did see it, that would not be stronger evidence than the methodology that's generally applied, because an individual human being with their individual observations isn't a reliable basis for conclusions. Rigorous scientific investigation has been demonstrated to be more reliable. But also, yes, there's a certain degree to which, for example, I cannot personally fly in the International Space Station and see that the Earth is an oblate spheroid, right? But using conclusions and without a, forgive me for being insulting to some people, absurd level of doubt and conspiracy-minded thinking, if you want to live life coming to conclusions, you have to start thinking about what type of evidence is reliable and examining how it is that human beings have learned things over the years. And unless you're going to go to the unjustified conclusion that, oh, there's a species of lizard people that is deliberately manipulating everything around me to fool me, or hard solipsism, which is I'm just a brain in a vat and the entire world is programmed to fool me, you have to work with what you have. And part of that is human beings working together to determine what is reliable.
Sure.
So if a more reliable method presented itself, I would adopt that, right? But until it does, I have to use this method. So there is a really, really, really difficult and tricky component that I actually think at the moment most people are not good at, right? So the people that read a book that warns them and does a little bit of fear-mongering about vaccinating their children are presenting something like science, which we call pseudoscience. So it dresses up in such a way to fool people into thinking that it's reliable. And many times it's done by people that think they're using a reliable method, right? So the problems of being a person in society and trying to become what is often referred to as scientifically literate, and being able to, as an adult that doesn't have, a teacher explaining the history of the thought about, chemical structures to you, right? Without a guide, it's very, very difficult to find your way towards reliable information about the world around you. I'll give you that. But the conclusion from that of, it's very difficult and there's only so certain that I, as a member of the public and certified non-scientific researcher, can come to, does not lead me to, well, then I can't believe it. It leads me to, well...
And I'm not saying that.
I don't think you're saying that, but I'm just sort of saying broadly, because there is also, an audience of however many people. So sorry for sort of jumping the gun in a direction that actually I don't think you were going. But
that's okay. It was good information. Yeah. So let's move on.
Where were you going with that, Jay?
Just that, if there are people who have religious experiences and they really believe that they have encountered the divine,
right?
Then sure, there can be false positives. There are cases where we can say, no, you're actually mentally ill.
Right.
No, you have something, you got hit on the head, whatever. And that explains the things that you're, experiencing.
Okay.
But in the cases where we don't have that kind of information, is it intellectually honest to just dismiss it as untrue?
Yes.
No.
When we don't have information to verify or falsify.
Okay.
It's intellectually honest to not come to a conclusion.
Yeah, I'd like to jump in now.
Yeah.
Thank you. Hey, Jay.
Yeah.
Okay, so I kind of want to walk through this a little bit with you, right? So we are talking about whether or not we can determine whether if something is true, right? And whether or not faith,
right,
or with this definition, believing without evidence, is a good way to get there, right? So were you listening when I talked about anecdotal evidence, right?
Yes.
Grabbing the hits and ignoring the misses.
And I don't think anecdotal evidence is a good way to draw conclusions.
Awesome. So
I think that when people have an experience of the divine, that other people shouldn't immediately say, well, you've got to be crazy.
No. Oh, gosh,
no. There's no way it can be true.
Jay, so here's a really, really terrible fact about the culture that we're in, right? Mental health is something that we all need to care about, because being able to function as a human being, it's difficult. We all have baggage and we all have different processes and different brains that may or may not, be able to produce, chemicals that would lead to depression. Or, we're still learning. It's an open field, right? But we all deal with mental health, right? And there are things that are observable, right? There have been recorded studies where people have gone in and experienced, something really, really radical, like, people, missionaries who come back from Africa, and they said, we were in this tribe and we saw, this exorcism, and the person was flying around and everybody saw it, right? But then they go back to the recording that they had, and none of that really happened. But they had convinced themselves after the fact. There's this groupthink that happens, right? We are really, really bad when it comes to memory and the way that we recall those things. And so what you need to do is you need to, if you're wondering whether or not this conclusion is justified, you need to be able to determine what the most likely response is. I'm not saying that somebody is damaged, right? I have false memories. Jamie has had false memories. We've all had false memories.
Most of them are.
And so if somebody says, I had this experience, well, hold on. If someone says, I had this experience, what I should do is I should test it, right? And here's the difference that I'm trying to point out, Jay. The difference is, if you wanted to, if you had the opportunity, you could go to a university and get a degree and learn that science. Right? Would you agree with me that going in, you actually could do that? You are not blocked from that, unless it's, financial or something like that. But you can go in and learn these things.
Knowledge.
Yeah. If you want to go in and investigate supernatural claims, people have done that. And it doesn't pan out the same way. It actually doesn't pan out to the same level that we expect in evidence for anything else, right? You were listening, I think you were on the line when we were talking to this guy who was saying that it's all just, it's all possible. But really, it's not all possible. We have to do the best we can to investigate these things. And they're not equal. Jay, they're not equivalent.
No, they're not.
Okay.
And I'm not saying they are.
Well, at the beginning you did. You did make the false equivalency, and so I wanted to walk you through that because that was the most important thing to me.
Can you say what you believe I said? Maybe I misspoke, or maybe...
Oh, maybe I'm misremembering.
I want to be clear.
Or I could be misremembering.
Yeah.
Right? So when we started this conversation, we were talking about faith and belief, right? And whether or not faith is a good reason to believe. Or, accepting something without evidence is going to get you to truth, right? And you and Jamie...
that was your definition.
Right, right. And when you had responded, maybe this was Jamie, I got the well, even in science, we're taking this person's word for it.
Word, yeah.
And so if we're believing... Do you get why I'm saying... Do you get why I'm responding to that way?
Right. But I guess I see, if we're committed to, rational investigation and using rational methods, then if somebody makes a claim, and, they feel very strongly about it, I don't think it is right to simply dismiss it as a foregone conclusion.
Oh, never.
That their claim is incorrect.
That's why when we listen to calls, we ask them, and we follow them where they're at. You're talking to two people who want to know the truth about the world. We're not sitting here waiting to smash people down. We have come to a place where we feel like, being able to communicate in this way is helpful. And so we're doing that, but we're not closed off to things. We just want to have the best toolbox possible. Right? And so if you're talking about somebody believing something emphatically, we're not going to sit there and deny, no, you don't believe it emphatically. Because that doesn't matter whether or not it's true. What matters is whether or not it's true. And so we investigate it the best way that we can. Right? And so in the broader scope, Jay, most things you're not going to know. Right? I have a cell phone, and I have no fucking clue how that works. I mean, I have a basic idea, but
computer.
Really, the way a lot of the world works, I don't know. But I do understand that these are things that you can know through investigation, right? And
so then, how do you validate assumptions?
Sure. So what you do,
your logic, will lead you from your assumptions.
Well,
but I don't know that it will
That's why you
do
need
anything other than showing if you have inconsistent assumptions.
That's why you need the best toolbox possible. Yeah. Because as Jamie had pointed out before, the best thing we can do is provisionally give a confidence value to things. We're never going to know whether or not a thing is absolutely capital T true. It's just not a thing that we are capable of. You know, we can go down that philosophical trail, but the fact is, because of that, we need to operate with the best confidence we have in things. And I mean, that's just the way of it. I fall asleep every night assuming that the sun's going to rise in the morning. I don't have any guarantee, but I do have a lot of evidence. I have a lot of evidence based on, testing it, right? I can go to everybody that I meet in the day and say, hey, did the sun rise this morning? Right? Yeah. And we all experienced that sunrise. Right? If somebody says, hey, if you light a candle and say Bloody Mary 12 or 13 times or whatever into a mirror, right? Either Bloody Mary is going to come through that mirror or not, right? We can test it. And if somebody says, oh my gosh, I saw Bloody Mary, right? Is it more likely that they saw Bloody Mary, or is it more likely that something else happened? Even if they're really, really convinced, Jay, that doesn't mean that it's more true. But it
also doesn't mean that it's false.
Yes. So, here, have you read?
No, Jamie, go ahead.
So what I will say is actually Bloody Mary is a really good example to contrast. So as far as a level of confidence that the Earth is going to rise tomorrow, the best evidence for that is an understanding of astronomy, right? It's a thing that we experience every day. And through observation, hundreds of years, there are always being a sky for humans to look at. If you get that metaphorical with your language, there's an understanding of the movement of the planets around the star Sol, which is the star at the center of our solar system, which is where the name actually comes from. But if you're comparing types of claims, right? So a person that says, hey, if you mix baking powder with vinegar, you can make a volcano, right? If you'd never seen that, that would be weird. But interesting and unexpected chemical reactions happen based on the chemical structures of things. If a person said, hey, if you mix vinegar with baking powder, a magical wizard will appear, and you wanted to investigate this, the basis for that understanding, while, I heard a bunch of stories about it, is an interesting and very common and easily accessible. You can get lots of those stories. Everyone that's ever gone into that house heard ghosts, right? But the basis by which we come to confident conclusions about the way the world works is through investigation, right? So you can ask everyone, did the sun rise today? And be sort of reasonably confident, yes, we understand that things move in space. But if you want to be actually confident about when the sun is going to rise in the morning, the sun will rise at 6:52, whatever time today, it takes an understanding of astronomy. And when you apply that level of rigorous investigation to claims about magical wizards coming out of baking soda and vinegar, and claims about mystical experiences or spiritual experiences or mental experiences, you get interesting results. So, for example, at the point at which, in society, right, and I think this is the part that grates people the most, someone says, hey, the other day I was waking up or whatever and I floated out of my body and I experienced astral projection, or I saw someone who was possessed by a demon, or I experienced God and I felt the Spirit of Jesus, fill me with brighter countenance. There's two sort of responses to that of, oh, wow, tell me more, and also, no, you're full of shit, you're probably crazy. And neither of these is really a scientific response, right? In the same way that...
They both are assuming the consequences.
Yeah, so reliable, very reliable scientific investigation, like the astronomy level, is not easy to come by, which makes it less attractive as a way of understanding the world. It's also not does not play into the tendencies of our minds as they have evolved over the tendency of our brains as they've evolved over millions of years. So it really does take a level of unbelievably disciplined, rigorous investigation that is helped along and facilitated by scientific skepticism. And so as far as not just examining, near-death experience claims about spiritual experiences, but understanding what a reliable way to come to reliable conclusions about things in the world, whether it's homeopathic medicine or, no, this used car really is great and it was only driven by a grandma to church on Sundays and never for anything else. It's great. Pay double price. Whatever. I would say investigate the methods of scientific skepticism, because you don't have to be in a university to do that. And in fact, as far as I'm aware, there isn't a school in the United States that teaches that very well.
Right. And I'm aware of many of those methods. And I do think that they debunk a great many claims.
They do. And even learning them absent a specific claim is good, because it can guide people in their day-to-day lives, right? Like, there's an example that we use. I'm talking a lot right now.
That's okay. I talked a lot.
No, if I can sum up, is it fair to say that you're arguing that it's good to use Occam's Razor to, find the simplest rational explanation for something?
It's a good starting point, but you don't ever want to stop there, because Occam's Razor can be wrong.
Yeah. So what?
Yes.
That's not what I was getting at, but that's another thing that I would be willing to talk about.
Yeah.
That wasn't actually the point of the words I just said.
But there's a ton of unpacking. Okay. I think we've been having a really, really packed conversation.
Yeah.
And I would love to actually go back over it, because I think that I may have talked past you in my response, and I want to make sure that we're meeting and talking about the right stuff. The same thing.
I'm perfectly comfortable with a scientific methodology for getting at truth. Mm-hmm. I just don't know that it precludes genuine experiences of God's action in the world.
Okay, so hold on. I love that. Let's investigate it together, Jay. Because if that is a true thing, I want to know it, right? I really honestly want to know. So how do you investigate it?
Are you asking me on the spot?
Well, I mean, like maybe some examples.
Or are you just saying, how does someone go about investigating?
How does someone go about investigating?
Because we can agree on a lot of tools. And I think that for the most part, based on this conversation, you would agree on all the tools that we'd give, right?
Yes.
But if you're using a different one, then I kind of want to investigate whether or not that's a good tool to use. And if we're using one that's really bad, I want to know, because I want to be the best I can at deciphering the world around me. Right? So what I would love for you to do is maybe in a week, right, over time, we can look back at this call, and then we can determine what tools are best to use to be able to determine whether or not the God that you think exists, and how we can explore it. Because I want to know as many true things as possible. Jamie wants to know as many true things as possible, and as few false things. And I think you do too. But I think there might be a tool lying around that's lending to not true things. And I'd love to explore that, because I want to invest in you too.
Okay.
Sound good?
Yeah, it does.
Awesome, man.
As a starting point, the thing about tools is they rely on the assumptions behind their use.
Yes.
Right?
But
how do you validate your assumptions?
You test them. So let's say I'm using a tool, right? And that tool is scientific skepticism, right? Let's say I want to use the tool of maybe the laws of logic. Let's go with the laws of logic, right? I think that can really cut down to the core of it, right? We use the laws of logic to be able to determine, a lot about the universe that we live in, right?
Yes. But logic is dependent on the assumptions you start with.
And what are those assumptions?
You can have flawlessly sound logic, and if your assumptions are flawed,
absolutely,
your conclusions are.
Absolutely, right? You need those premises to be true, right? And so the funny thing is, I know Jamie has said it, and I'm going to say it as well. We operate using the best tools possible, right? If you can give me a time, an example, or anything that can show that the laws of logic are not useful or, not reliable at getting to truth, then I will throw it out.
Honestly, that would be terrifying.
It would be.
If I could do that.
But the point is, we're using the best that we have. And it's not always going to be, maybe in 1,000 years we'll find, better tools or better be able to shape the tools that we have, but you don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, do you? I mean, yes.
No, and I guess I've met a lot of people who I feel like they do that because I feel like they start with the assumption, for example, that only naturalistic explanations are possible.
There are a lot of people that start with that assumption.
If you define naturalism as everything that exists, then everything would, by that definition, be naturalistic. You know what I mean?
If you define it that way, but that might exclude something that doesn't fit our assumptions about what it means for something to be natural.
So then from there, you would need to provide a definition for that thing that is not natural so that we can explore it, just like everything else, right?
Well, it might be more helpful to first define what is natural.
Agreed.
If you just say natural is everything that exists and God exists, then God is natural.
There's an if in there that we don't.
Yeah, we're not going to follow. Yeah, we don't accept premise 2. We would think that premise 2 there would need to be validated.
We don't have to go there.
In this call,
it's just it seems like an incredibly overly broad definition to say natural is just. We're just going to say it's everything. Therefore it's not nothing.
So maybe we can shave that down into something that would work. And I agree that your tools should be usable. But we're over time.
I think for this week we should probably wrap it up. The last thing that I would say is when a person comes to me with a claim about something supernatural, I use, in general, my sort of knowledge about a lot of the flaws in sort of natural reasoning, right? So there's a couple of words in here that I would use, that you're using that I wouldn't use. Rationalism, because I would use empiricism, which is actually a significant difference.
That's fair.
And you're also saying your assumptions rather than conclusions or premises, and there's sort of a difference there. But I will give you that on a day-to-day basis, most people have assumptions rather than conclusions they've examined. But what I use is...
Right. You're just wanting to use more technical language. That's fine.
Yeah. So, for not just for semantic difference, but because it plays in my point, which is that I'm very, very familiar with what I perceive as a tendency in human beings to trust their own mind and trust their own reasoning to an unreasonable degree. And so when a person says, I felt this thing, I experienced this thing, I saw this thing, it must be true. This morning, before I woke up, I experienced getting up, being alarmed that it was only 30 minutes to the show, and being more than 30 minutes away, swearing loudly and making my bed immediately before I woke up, and was alarmed at what time it was, and then checked my watch and realized, no, I'd woken up actually before my alarm. That's something that is very, very real in my mind. Every aspect of those two completely contradictory memories exists in my mind right now. And based on further experience, I'm confident in saying that one of them was a partial result of either a dream state or, whatever it is, beta state. What are the one where you're transitioning between being awake and asleep? So when people come to me and say, well, I had this experience, I was floating, and there's nothing outside of their personal experience as they can report it experienced by their mind, and they believe, oh, that is always a reliable source of information, that tells me something about how reliable many of the things that they will report on that basis are. So while I can't come to the conclusion, no, there's no supernatural, I can come to the conclusion that the evidence they're offering is insufficient.
Because it's completely personal and you can't observe it.
Because because while I am not a super great skeptical thinker, they, on the face of it, know less about that than I do.
Right.
And are not critically examining their own experiences in a way that I would, right? In a way that I know is important if you're trying to get to truth. So I don't come with the assumption, oh, there's no ghosts. I come with the assumption that there are unexplained things and a lot of phenomena is psychological. And I don't mean crazy. I mean the way that people that are not crazy think their mind works is way above the way their mind actually works. Your mind is not reliable. Your memories are not reliable. Your reasoning is not reliable. Particularly not anywhere near where human beings associate it, where personal experience would place it. And that's a really difficult concept to get across to people. It's pretty much as difficult to get across as this God that you've prayed to your entire 50-year life. There's insufficient evidence to support it.
There's so much invested that people put in that.
Yeah.
I mean, it's so hard to let go.
Yeah.
Especially
and you can't
because,
not invest in your brain.
I mean, I talked to a guy who was Pentecostal, and I asked him, I said, so if God didn't exist, all the times you spoke in tongues was just you babbling to yourself. And like
I think the evidence for glossolalia is a little bit different from that. I mean, you do kind of have a brain state change when you go into that. I think
I don't know whether it's a brain state change, but human beings do a lot of things in what people often say are hypnotic states. Except
but the reason that I'm bringing it up is because he had invested in it, and if he was wrong, it would lead to embarrassment.
Right.
Yeah.
So that investment kept him from exploring it. But we are so over time.
Yeah.
We have to go.
Will you call back, Jay?
This was an awesome conversation.
Please stay in touch in whatever your preferred method is. You've got email, Facebook, Twitter, etc.
All of those things. Take care, man. We've got.
Yeah, we gotta sign out.
Can I ask one quick question?
Bring it.
Do I need to call early to get in early, or do you guys just pick?
If you call about 30 minutes before, or even just 20 minutes, you'll get in.
Yeah.
But we really got to go, Jay. Thank you for your call. You've been fantastic.
Take care.
We will continue this conversation. And with that, let's get some love rings.
Yes.